Hi, everyone. I'm James Protin. I'd like to give a special thank you to our sponsors for the podcast. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the podcast. We're excited to say that this is episode number 34, and our guest today is somebody that I've been really anxious to talk with, Jennifer Teprani. And Jen is a licensed professional counselor at Associates in Counseling and Wellness in McMurray. She is also married to one of a former guest. You are the first husband and wife who be on the show, which is good. Nice. And depending on how this goes today, maybe the last, but we'll see.
We'll see.
So one thing I have to tell you is welcome, number one. And number two is
Thank you.
This show absolutely has to get more views than Steve's.
Okay.
So we have to share this and share the heck out of it. And so listen, welcome.
Thank you.
I'm so happy you could join us.
I'm excited to be here. So
I've been excited to talk with you because of your background, being a therapist, and mental health is a big issue, and it's something that we talk about on the podcast. Not a lot, but it's we don't shy away from it. But I think it's something that we don't discuss enough as a society. You know?
Well, it's a taboo topic. I mean, if someone has a broken leg, you can notice it. But if you have depression, it's not something that somebody really wants to talk about very much because it's not a visual.
Sure.
It's not a visual health issue that someone's going through. So I feel like society, people are more likely to talk about physical aspects than they are their mental health aspects. So it is a very taboo topic. It's becoming less, thankfully. But
thank goodness. Yeah.
That's so,
and there's so many things tied to it, right? You mentioned depression, but I think mental health it's a huge issue in the addiction and recovery piece.
Right.
The drug problem that we have, particularly with opioids, I think is rooted in mental health. And it's and also the way that our society looks at people in recovery.
Absolutely.
Again, that's because we look down on people instead of looking at them and say, okay, these are our fellow humans. We need to lift them up.
Yeah.
We just want to, we want them to go away.
And also the genetic disposition for that being, if you have parents that were addicts, the genetic disposition to have that addictive thing in your genes in order, whether it be drugs or gambling or, any type of, is something as simple as, shopping, addiction to spending a lot of money and not being able, those type of things. Those addictive personalities can definitely be genetic and mental, being able to.
And humans can be addicted to literally anything.
Anything.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's just one of those things, But I'm really, and I'd like to talk right now in the beginning about children, right?
Okay.
And because even when you do have these conversations, as we discussed about mental health, we don't talk about kids, right? Because people think, kids, they're young, they're carefree, they got everything, their whole life.
They're resilient,
Right. But that is a huge, huge problem. And you've spent a lot of time as a counselor in schools with young children. What do you see? How can we, identify that, right? I mean,
Well, I think one of the things that in schools is, I was in Carlington for 3 years. I was in Pittsburgh Public. Right now I'm in Trinity and Charleroi. I'm in different schools. I think one of the biggest things that I look for is my teachers. My teachers are phenomenal, assets that I have. I'll never forget, I went up to Cal U, now Penn West, and I had a friend ask me, she was a professor, she's like, can you come and talk to my seniors that are gonna be teachers and tell them what to look for in a classroom? What do you see? What do you need to look for? So I remember going into this classroom and all these students were sitting there and I was like, this is what you're gonna encounter. This is the trauma that I see. This is, all different things, whether it's not having food at home, parents are getting divorced, the whole gamut of different things that can happen. And a girl raised her hand, and I'll never forget this, and she said to me, she goes, I'm going to work in an affluent school district. I'm not going to encounter trauma.
Really?
And I said to her, I will introduce you to one of my friends that work in an affluent school district, and you can talk to her because she's been a therapist there for 10 years. and I'll let you see what she sees. And it was a little, like, it took me back a little bit, because I was like, part of me was like, that's very naive of you. Welcome
that's
welcome
the
to
first
the
word
real
that
world.
popped into my head.
Welcome to the real world.
Right.
But I said, trust me, you will encounter trauma. And this is, I think I look to teachers because, like, in Carlington, I was one of one therapist for 700 students. So I couldn't see everything that was going on.
Right.
So I relied on that staff so much to say, hey, look, I've got a student in my class. They're withdrawn, their grades are dropping, something's up. Can you just be my, like, wingman here and figure it out?
A lot of times teachers will see behavior changes more than parents. The teachers
absolutely
really get to know
it's
kids
their safe
sometimes
space.
better than parents do.
A lot of times, and I think that's
Especially
one of the
if you have
reasons.
two working parents,
Yeah, and I think that's why anxiety and depression went up so much during the pandemic, because school was the safe place.
Yeah.
And you were at home, and we
Right.
had so many issues that they didn't have that teacher to vent to. They didn't have those things. And just like counseling, I'm not taught how to be a teacher. When they're a teacher, they're not taught how to deal with mental health.
Right.
So
Right.
I don't expect them to do my job, and don't ask me to teach a math class. It's not happening.
Right.
So it's one of those things. I really relied on that staff, and they were, just speaking of Carlington in general, the staff there was phenomenal. They are huge advocates. The whole administration was huge advocates for mental health, and I couldn't have been more blessed to be in that environment.
That's awesome.
But they, it's nice that you can see different things. And I can remember one time I was standing in the hallway with the high school principal there, and you're trained as a mental health professional to kind of see. And I said, that one. They were walking in off the bus, and he's like, why? I said, I need to talk to that one today. I was like, something's going on. And and he was one of mine in general. And I remember pulling him down, and I was like, okay, this is what's going on at home. Like, this is what I found out. So, but yeah, the population in schools, I'm seeing the refugee population is huge. We have sex trafficking victims that have come from other countries. We have, different things that we have encountered that they're expected to go to class and do everything and just function.
Right. They're just dropped into literally a different culture.
Yeah, and if I have, the Jewish Refugee Center here in Pittsburgh is a phenomenal resource. They're amazing. They work so hard with these people that, as a parent looking at some of these kids, if I was in that situation, I would move hell and earth to get my kid out of that situation.
Sure.
So, and telling some of their stories is just phenomenal. About 6 years ago, I was called, I don't want to depress anybody, but it is mental health. So I was called to an elementary school, and they were like, Jen, we need you to come do an observation. Like, we have these two little boys, they're brothers, they're in our class, they're not, every time we say come to the carpet, in every elementary school classroom, you go to the carpet and you got to go sit and have story time and calendar and all that kind of stuff. Right. She's like, I need you to come do an observation. I said, all right. Sometimes I'm just sitting in the back room doing an observation and trying to see. So she called him to the carpet, and both these little boys would crawl under their desk and hide as soon as it would happen. And I said, have we talked to the mom? And they said, we don't have a translator. No problem. State of mental health, or Pennsylvania has a translator line. You can call in, say what language you need, and have a translator. It's amazing.
Okay.
So,
wow, that's cool.
And a lot of times working with refugees, I'm like, I don't speak all these different languages.
Right.
I speak Southern and a little bit of Yinzer. That's about it.
That's a scary combination.
That's a scary combination for sure. So called her in, and they had fled from Syria, where they had, I'm pretty sure it was Syria. They had fled from a country where they were kidnapping young boys to be boy soldiers.
Oh.
So these boys had witnessed their father being murdered. And the significance of the rug is when they would come and knock on the door, their mom would lift a rug up in their entryway and hide them in a hole in their house and put the rug back over them.
Oh my goodness.
They would hear things their mother they didn't know, but their mother was raped, they would hear these things. So going and sitting on a rug or going to the rug was the significance. And as a teacher...
That was a trigger.
That was a trigger for them. As a teacher, she just wasn't prepared. Nothing to her... She had no idea that, but these are the type of trauma that these kids encounter, and we're like, go to school, sit in class, behave, do expectly, and let's not focus on mental health. And slowly but surely, mental health is starting to become, a focus. And that's an extreme story, but a lot of these kids do come from homes that, as adults, we're not able to process. So it's hard to say to a 6-year-old to a 17-year-old process this and be a functioning person in school.
Absolutely.
So yeah, it's very important. There was a pandemic grant. $200,000 was allotted to school districts in PA to address trauma, specific trauma. So that's one of the reasons that Associates in Wellness is in a lot of different things. Is we do work with different things to increase mental health. These school districts are like, we need help. And we need it now. Right. So it's so nice to, I wish there was, 30 of us that were able to do it, but it is crazy the amount of trauma that we do see in schools and the assistance that they need.
It's hard to believe. How do we increase awareness about that? Because, the average person, and I don't want to say people don't care, because they do, even if you don't have children,
right?
Our young people, that's our future,
right? Absolutely,
right?
Absolutely.
When you look at your kids, my grandkids, at my age, those are the people that I'm going to be counting on to take care of me in about 10 or 15 years from now, God willing. So we have to be invested. We have to be invested in that. So how do we increase awareness? What are your thoughts on that?
So I think the thing about increasing awareness about schools and mental health is just look at the past few years. let's look at that. Adults had increased anxiety with the pandemic of the uncertainty and these different things. I think expecting a child to process that, even in my own home when that was happening, it was like, oh, we're doing this, it's canceled. Oh, we're going to do this, it's not. And the uncertainty of not knowing what's next increased a lot of, I think it's just being aware in general. And if you don't search it out, I'm not saying do your own research. Please don't do a Google search, but not what I'm endorsing.
Sure.
But I think the most important thing is just being able to advocate for mental health and saying, there was a bill that was just on, the floor that was for school mental health to increase funding. 205 Republicans voted against it. I'm not trying to get political, but why are we voting against it?
That's a great question. And so, we can't be afraid to be political, right? Especially with an issue as important as that. And you mentioned a couple of pieces of legislation that I'd like to get into.
Yeah.
But, what are your thoughts about the kitchen table, right? See, I'm old, okay?
Yeah.
So when I was a teenager, and we all had issues, but we resolved it with mom and dad
at the kitchen table. Yeah.
Right. So it was like, it didn't always, you don't always come to the resolution you may have wanted.
Yeah.
But I think that families have gotten away. Well, you have broken homes, you have divorce, you have all those things. The divorce rate is higher than it's ever been. But that kitchen table is something that, it's missing.
It is missing. And I think it's very difficult. I look at just people that, friends that my kids are around. And I know some nights we don't get home. It's either dinner at 3:00 or 9:00 if your kids play sports.
No, you're exactly
And sometimes it's like grab a slice of pizza and go to bed. But I feel like a lot of times, two working parents, we've gotten away from that. And it's very, very difficult because sometimes even our household, I look and I'm like, okay, we've sat down for dinner maybe 3 times in the past 8 or 9 days. So it is very difficult to have that. Steve and I think, are huge advocates of check-ins, of don't tell me your day's fine. Don't tell me it's okay. You're, 13 and 11 and we're teaching Matthew at 5, but tell me one good thing, tell me one not so good thing. And if you have not so good, tell me 2 great things that happen. I just want to know a specific, because I think when a parent goes in and say, how's your day? 99.9% of the time your kids are going to say, it was great.
Yeah.
So if you can open the conversation of communication and say, what'd you do in science class today? It's more specific to kids to get them talking with communication. When you ask those one-word questions, you're going to get a one-word answer with kids.
Well, you're exactly right. And one of the problems we have is there are so many parents out there that are not good communicators, even with their own children.
Right. I work with a lot of adults.
They don't know how to ask those questions, and
Right.
I get that from our twins they're in 9th grade. They're 14, almost 15. And I ask them every day, how was school? How was this? What did you do? And, and my grandson, Caleb, is in honors classes. He does, on the surface, he does everything
a lot of
right.
pressure.
So you think, okay, well, he gets good grades. He does all these things. He's good, right? No, those kids need to talk as well.
Working in high schools, honor students are one of the ones I keep my eye on the most because of the pressure of perfectionism. I think with students and, kids in general, we have created this perfectionism society, whether it's the social media aspect, you have to have the perfect body, the perfect life, the perfect everything. And then not only that, you need to make all A's. You need to so when do they get an opportunity to make a mistake? So honor students really are in schools. I'm like, are you okay? What are you I'm getting through. And their tension and anxiety can be so high because I am in 5 honors classes and I'm an athlete and I'm, have to be the societal perfect person.
You put so much pressure on kids at such a young age.
Right. Right.
It's frustrating. I really relate to my grandkids and their experiences now. And I have a grandson who lives in North Dakota. His father's in the Air Force. Okay. And he does something. He doesn't do the traditional sports. He races dirt bikes.
Okay.
And he this season that just finished, he was ranked first in points in the state of North Dakota in 2 classes, right? Which is great, right? That's fantastic. But what really concerns me is if he goes to a race and finishes second, he'll cry. He's devastated, right? Because he now has that expectation, and other parents at the track are talking about him, and anything less than first than the checkered flag,
correct.
It's a failure to him.
Yeah. Well, and I had mentioned being a sports parent. Sophie was a swimmer, and she's in 6th grade. So when she was swimming in 5th grade, they're just learning. They're just doing all these different things. And, so many parents, as soon as they would get out of the pool, is like, you're 3 seconds faster. You're this, than last meet. You got to do this. You got to do that. And they're 9 years old, 10 years old. Right. And Sophie would be like, how did I do? I'm like, you did great. Did you have fun? Because the pressure, she already knows when she steps out of that pool or when she, steps off the court, what she did right and wrong. I feel like a lot of times as parents, it's our job to be that supportive. Win or lose, we're here for you.
Right.
And with Will, and Sophie, I always say it's not a loss, it's a lesson learned. So if you lose, you look at that loss and say, what can I do different to improve? Because in life, if I'm teaching you only to win, you're always going to be disappointed at some point. You're always going to be disappointed.
Absolutely.
And that's what one of the things that we say to our kids, if you step in a room, there's probably going to be somebody smarter, richer, anything that more in that room, you need to be able to accept that. So, and if you go into a room thinking I'm the best at absolutely everything, it's going to be, you're always going to be disappointed.
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
One of the best things, I literally yesterday got a message from William's football coach's wife. Sorry, that was a little bit. And she said to me, in practice, Ringgold High School, the high school coach called Will over to show them like a pass. So the middle school, he's in 8th grade, called up to the high school to show a pass. And she's like, you need to understand, I just need to express to you how impressed the coaches are with him being humble and respectful. And I said to him, and this is one of the things that Steve and I preach to all of our kids, at the end of the day, your stats don't matter. Your grades don't matter. That may be a parenting flaw that some people will disagree with me at. What matters at the end of the day
100%.
is how you respect and how you act. I said there's a big difference between confidence and cocky. If I ever see you cocky, I will knock you back down to reality.
You know what? It's a huge difference, but it's a fine line.
Right.
The kids don't get taught.
Yeah.
You know, and I have to say at this point, I'm very happy that your kids got your brains, your looks, and your personality. Let's just be very clear on that, okay? Because they'd have been struggling if they took after their dad. I mean, let's be honest. I'm actually, listen, our buddy Swaggy B, he and I had a conversation, and we actually are both shocked. But we still can't figure out how Steve got you. We just don't know. I mean, it's like
he has a little charm. So,
knowing Steve, and I love him, but I mean, like most of us, he outkicked his coach, right? but no, I tease you because I'm huge friends and fans of the Prani family as a whole. But Will is when I look at him and I see how he conducts himself and how he carries himself. I mean, he has that innate leadership quality that you just can't teach.
Yeah.
He's got heart.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
He's got heart.
And that's another thing that we talk to our kids about is, this was several years ago. Will was complaining. It was in baseball. He's like, I'm not getting this. I'm not getting, I am to all my kids' coaches, if any of them watch this, I will never say, you need to put my kid in this position. You need to do this. Yeah. I will never do that because I didn't sign up to be a coach, first of all. And second of all, one of the things that we tell our kids is work harder. Mm-hmm. So nothing is ever going to be handed to you. Nothing is ever you better earn it. So, and because if you earn it, nobody can take it away.
Right.
So, and that's one of the things that we're trying to teach them. So, but no, that means more to me as a parent than anything if somebody says your kid is very respectful and they are able to follow directions and do this. Because it's so funny. Will even complained the other day. He's like, I was walking down the hallway. I had to go over I guess he was in the high school for something. He's like, a teacher stopped me. He was like, I know your mom. And I was like, you need to understand, we have eyes everywhere. And he was like, oh, he was like that. He's like, as a teenager, he's very frustrated by that. But, I grew up in a small town and I was always Frank Page's granddaughter or Ray's daughter or, Jeff or Eric's little sister. I was always that person, and everybody always knew before I got home if I, said a crossword to anybody, not that I did it often, but like if I did it, they knew because they were like, well, I'm calling your grandfather, I'm calling your dad. That's one of the reasons that, Steve has been offered jobs all over this country, from Los Angeles to New York to Dallas to, Florida. He's been offered jobs everywhere. And I said to him, I graduated from the same high school as my grandfather and my dad. And there's something about that I hold dear, that, that we all went to that same school and we all had that tradition. And I had teachers that knew my dad and, and I said, I love that, that my kids get that with Ringgold because they know your dad, because they walk into high school and they see their dad's picture on the wall and they're like, oh. And I said, you need to appreciate that because your dad went through there and you can, people complain. It infuriates me so much on social media if they complain about school districts. It's these teachers work so hard and they're so diligent and they're so amazing. I've had nothing but amazing experiences with the Ringgold teachers with my kids. They are so passionate about what they do, and they do it with the resources that are available to them. Right.
Which aren't always great.
Which isn't great in the public school system. So I have nothing but positive things to say about them. And they're a phenomenal group that have really helped. We're co-people and partners in molding my kids into who they need to be. Sure. So, because it can't all, when there's bullying issues in schools, it can't all fall on the school. It can't all fall on the parents. You're a joint effort. Because working in schools, I've called parents before and said, I did a risk assessment on your kid. I really think they're suicidal. These are what I'm seeing. I really think you should take him to like Western Psych or to have a formal evaluation.
How do you have a conversation?
And
that has to be crazy difficult.
It's a very hard decision. And, you know, I've had parents say to me, no, they're not, send them back to class.
Right.
And I'm like,
it's that suck it up, man up, whatever mentality.
Suck it up, throw some dirt on it. Yeah. I don't have time for this. Right. I'm at work, which I get.
Sure.
As a working parent, I completely get that. But at the same time, you know, I've said, I need you to understand the severity of this. I'm not calling you for fun. Like, these are the signs that I'm seeing. And there comes a decision as a therapist, do I 302 them? Or, you know, and there's 201, which is voluntarily going in. So, and I said, this is the decision you're going to have me make. So, you know, and I've said that to parents. And as a parent, I hate to say nothing shocks me anymore, but it does still shock me. Because just as a parent, if somebody from the school, like we talked about the school being the safe place sometimes for a lot of kids, if the school called me and said, I really feel like your child is suicidal, you need to do this, everything in my world would stop and go.
Absolutely.
But a lot of times, you know, this is my mentality going into schools. When I have a kid with me and I'm working with a kid, my thought process is, this is someone's entire world.
Right.
How do I make sure that their world is safe? And that's kind of the mentality I have when working with kids. Okay. And sometimes when I call a parent like that, I'm like, okay, how do I make this kid feel loved and special and validated? And like, because they're not always going home to a loving home. Right. So how do I work with that? And mental health, to process that, a lot of times my adults come in and say, this was my childhood and I'm still processing it. I'm 50, 60, you know, however years old. How do I process this?
You carry that.
You carry it for the rest of your life.
Yes.
Yeah.
Those childhood traumas. You know, and let's talk about bullying for a little bit, because all of a sudden bullying is like, and I shouldn't say all of a sudden, but again, generationally speaking, you know, this is a huge issue in this age of social media.
Yeah, it is, because, you know, I'm a 90s kid. When I went home, if there was somebody that was rude to me, it stopped at 3:00. Now, you know, I have students come in and say, you know, I'm getting harassing messages at 10 o'clock at night, 11 o'clock at night. I'm getting, because it's through Snapchat. Like, if I could delete Snapchat, my world would be so
terrible.
My world would be so much easier working in high schools. It's like, it's one of the craziest things. And working with high schoolers, the last thing they want is to be treated like a child. So like a few years ago, I had two girls that were just in this like Snapchat bullying war. I mean, it was just bad. And finally I got to the point, this one was complaining and this one was complaining. I brought them in and I was like, could you just both quit being jerks to each other? And it has stopped, because you both are doing it.
Right.
So, and they were like, oh, okay. I said, delete, block each other, don't talk to.
Just
because
stop.
I said, in this world, you're not going to like everybody. Let's be a realist.
Yeah.
And they did, and they were like, it's oddly peaceful. I'm like, really?
Imagine that.
Imagine that. When you don't engage in that kind of behavior, how amazing and like calming it can be.
Right.
So, and that's one of the things that I like with my adult clients and my kids. You need to create your own peace. So if you're inviting this, you know, my kids do have social media. My son's 13. I am very diligent about looking at it, watching it.
Yes.
Who is this? Who is this? Because, you know, working in high schools and working with different things, you know, he is an athlete. I said, one of the things that these recruiters look at is your social media.
Right.
I said, and if you're engaging in any type of bullying behavior or anything like that, first of all, it won't be tolerated. Second of all, they're not going to want you, because you're going to be a representative of their college. And if you are engaging in this, I said, trust me, everything that you put on the internet will come back to haunt you in any way, shape, or form.
You're exactly right, because being a bully doesn't make you tough. It really kind of makes you kind of a sissy. Right? Yeah. Because by definition, you're picking on somebody who is less than you, right?
Yeah.
You know, one thing that college coaches, high school coaches, no coach should want is to have that disrupt their locker room.
No,
right?
Not at all.
Because that culture, that team culture is critically important. And if you are bullying somebody who is weaker, right?
Yeah.
Then you're obviously not a team player.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, and also a lot of times, not playing devil's advocate, a lot of these bullies, you have to look at what trauma they're going to. I always say hurt people hurt people.
Yes.
They want to hurt people. So a lot of times, like being in schools, if somebody's being bullied or someone's, dressing that kind of thing, it's looking at it and saying, okay, not that that's an excuse for the behavior in any way, shape, or form, but what are they experiencing that they need help with? Mm-hmm. And I think that's one of the things that schools, a lot of times bullies, not all, will act out as a way to get attention. I'm not getting attention at home, so I'm going to act out at school, because even if you come and sit in the principal's office for an hour, you're still getting that attention, even if it's negative attention.
Sure.
So how can we address that? How can we combat that? So, and that's really hard. School counselors are worked, so thin, because there's so much emphasis on testing and, class schedules and, all the things.
There's a difference, right? Guidance counselors are not counselors.
Correct.
Right? So a school has a guidance counselor. That doesn't mean that, they're not talking to your kids about mental health. They're not talking about bullying and things like that. So, and there's a lot of school districts in Pennsylvania that can't afford someone.
Correct.
Right?
Exactly.
Because you're not going in there for free. You work for a company that is in business.
Yeah. And luckily, the state of Pennsylvania is awesome in the fact that if you have a 504 plan or an IEP, not 504 plan, you can bill access, you can bill the state through it.
Oh, okay.
So school districts can get reimbursed for a certain percentage of our services. As long as we write a note in their IEP, a little blurb of what's going on, they can get reimbursed for that. Okay. So a lot of school districts do that. They're like, well, instead of paying this, if we're only going to pay, a certain percentage, we need you in here.
Yeah, sure.
Because our school counselors are thin. The principals are, constantly dealing with behavior problems. So if we can have this person to kind of offset that, absolutely, we're going to do it.
One of my grandkids showed me a video that found its way to social media. There was a student in their school in the cafeteria that had a serious meltdown, started throwing out, "I'm going to kill all of you," and this and that and the other, and back when I was in high school, we would laugh at that. Right. But now in our world today, that's something that has to be taken incredibly
Very
seriously. So have you been faced, and we talked about, Steve, is a gun owner, you have guns in your home, you have, those age children. Yeah. And I'm sure that especially the boys, Will in particular, is curious about guns. And that's, boys are. So first question, I guess it's two parts. Have you been faced with a serious consequence like that in your job? And how do you handle that at home?
Yeah, so I have. I had a situation in a high school. They didn't have metal detectors, which is another huge expense for schools to have security.
Yes.
I'm very blessed that my kids live in a district that you're not getting past that door between metal detectors, armed police officers. And I hate that the country has to be like that. But in our society, it has to happen.
Right.
You don't have to have. A few years ago, working in a school district, it's been several years actually, I had a kid, he just trusted me. And he came into my office and said, "I've got something in my backpack and I need you to know." And I was like, okay. And it's one of those things you kind of have protocols in schools, like call somebody else in. And I said, "Here's what I'm going to ask you to do." And usually in those type of situations, they don't want to hurt their therapist or their trusted person because I trust you.
Yeah,
so
sure.
I'm coming to you because I trust you.
Right.
And he did have a gun in his backpack. And with no metal detectors in the school, they never knew. And he had it in his backpack for 3 days. He said, "For 3 days, I've had this in my bag." And I just knew, he said, because I had been working with him, he said, "You told me every decision I make will change what direction my life is going." And he goes, "I know I need help." Wow. And I said,
That's
okay.
Powerful.
So I said,
It's
okay.
amazing.
And it was one of those things. Was I shaking when I moved the bag? Absolutely.
Sure.
And I said, here's what's going to happen. So, and it was one of those things, we were able to get him help. We were able to do these things. His parents didn't, have their guns locked up properly.
Right.
He had access to it. And they just said, no, we just kept it in our nightstand and we didn't check that it was gone.
Sure. Well,
So,
how do you punish a kid like
and it's
that?
very hard. It's
Right?
and it's there's so many debates on should parents be held liable. But
Right.
when you look at the statistics of school shootings, there is a stereotype, and a lot of these school shooters get these guns legally.
Right.
So it's my husband and I disagree on a lot of things. We different things, but and it's very hard because a lot of times these school shooters have extremist views.
Mm-hmm.
I've never in 20 years of mental health had somebody walk into my office and say, I have some extreme views. Could you help me change them?
Mm-hmm.
So
Right.
it's kind of like a double-edged sword. It's kind of like, how do you deal with that? Having guns in my home, Steve and I disagree with that. We definitely do. He is, and we've had these discussions. I'm like, why do you need, an AR? Because he's an owner of one.
Sure.
And he always says people use it as hunting. I'm like, well, then you're a pretty shitty hunter. Excuse me. If you need an AR to shoot a deer, let's talk about that. So, but I think one of the things that we've taught is we have keys hidden. We have them locked up. They're very secure. Not only that, ammo is kept separate than guns. Every single one of our weapons also have a padlock or a lock
Right.
on the trigger, so you can't even push it without the key to the lock, the key to the ammo, the key. There's like a 5-step. There's like a 5-step safety thing.
But Steve is not. I know Steve, right?
Yes.
And he does not have those extremist views.
Correct.
And I'll give you an example of this. This is one of the
Yeah.
things that concerns me, and about what our society, our country has become, right? Because there is a huge portion of Americans who equate owning a gun with being a patriot.
Correct.
Okay. So I went to, and I won't mention any names, but I went to a baby shower
Okay.
at a private residence.
Okay.
Okay. In a yard. House, you're in your own yard. And the father had a gun on his hip.
It happened to us at a restaurant a few weeks
His
ago.
father had a gun on his hip. And
Yeah.
I'm thinking, what did you do that you're in your own yard and you have to have a gun on your
Right.
And it was explained to me, well, that they're pro Second Amendment and open carry and all those things. That's great. That's great. But the fact that you're wearing a gun, a sidearm in your yard is disconcerting to me.
Right. Well,
right?
even the debate that teachers need to carry guns. Because
No.
if a teacher has a handgun and somebody has an AR or a rifle, who's winning that battle?
That's exactly right. You're exactly right.
So,
and who's training those teachers?
The teachers have enough.
Responsible gun owners.
Yeah.
Okay, that's fantastic.
Fantastic.
I support that. Right.
Yeah.
Like Valiant Sportsman. Okay, Nick's a member of the Valiant Volunteer Fire Department, but the Valiant Sportsmen's Association, which is a Monongahela organization, they promote responsible gun ownership. They give scholarships to Ringgold kids. They they train. They do everything right.
Yeah.
Those guys are an example, as is Steve, right? And you, of what responsible gun ownership in this country should be. But it's those extremist views that carry, and this is stuff. Everything is generational, right?
Yeah.
I've talked to educators. My father was a teacher. I was raised by teachers. My oldest daughter is a teacher. She's an elementary teacher. So it's something that I pay attention to. It's very close to me. But I've talked to educators where they've had incredibly bright, gifted students who have no interest in going to college whatsoever or doing anything with their lives outside of high school because they've never seen their parents go out to work.
Correct.
Generational poverty, generational, addiction, those types of things. I don't think adults realize how closely our kids and our grandkids are paying attention to what we do.
100%. Like, so I had to go back to CalU. I'll still call it CalU. This
Please
past
do.
year.
The Penn West thing drives me crazy.
But I had to, after, I went to University of Alabama, I went to Pitt, and then I had to do some more credits towards my license this past year. And I went back there and I had to take like 24 credits in 2 semesters of graduate school.
Okay.
Out of my mind. And I had a conversation with William.
That's a lot.
That's a lot. Working full time. I had a conversation with Will and I said, I haven't, because I think as parents, you need to be able to own up to your own behavior. Mm-hmm. Because if you were just say, I'm the parent and I'm always right, you're teaching your kids that there's no room for discussion.
Right.
And that you don't make mistakes because you're a parent. So you're perfect. Sure. So I had a discussion with William and I said, I know I haven't been there for you as much as I could the past year because I've been so busy. And I said, I'm sorry. And I just want you to know, like, I was doing it to better myself. And he said, you know what you proved to me, Mom? And I'm going to try not to get emotional. And I said, what? And he said, that you can do anything. And I was like, okay.
I love that.
And I was like, and that meant so much to me because as a parent, I feel like as a parent, every day you're like, dang it, I'm failing. You feel like you're failing. Like, I've got to worry about them emotionally. I've got to worry about them mentally. How are they doing academically? Do they have clothes on their back? Do they have food in the house? If I have Oreos and milk in my house, my kids will survive. But if I have those 2 things, they're happy. But I feel like you said, kids are watching every single thing. And it doesn't have to be parents. I mean, I know a lot of kids being raised by grandparents or older siblings or, whatever.
Absolutely.
So
that's a big thing. And the one thing that you left out when you talked about graduate school and having a full-time job is having 3 children, and that's amazing, kiddo. I mean, believe me, don't, and the fact that Will said that to you and, you have set the bar for them. And I think we don't do that enough.
Yeah.
We want to, everybody wants. Listen, my dad always said to me, everybody's kid's Mickey Mantle.
Yeah,
right?
correct. And trust me, we're in baseball. We get it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's what I used him. I could have said,
every kid's Mickey Mantle.
Every kid is Mickey Mantle. And one of the hardest things for us to do as parents and grandparents is to love our children and grandchildren, support them, but also to acknowledge their faults and their flaws. Right. Because we all have them.
Correct.
We all have them. And, your kid probably isn't going to be the biggest, the strongest, the fastest, or the prettiest.
Yeah.
Right? The smartest. I mean, that's great.
Yeah.
But what do you do? How do you encourage and empower your kids? Mm-hmm. Somebody said to me once that the world is run by C students. Okay. You have your best and your brightest, but the nuts and bolts of society
is C student. I 1000% agree with that.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's I've been in business for 40 years. I've been in a technical field in engineering and all those things. And that's very true.
Yeah.
That is very true. The best engineers I've ever worked with, weren't the PhDs. They weren't the valedictorians of their graduating class. They were the guys that got by and made it. But once they got out in the real world, they learned. Yeah. They learned. And those are the guys and women who really, they're the nuts and bolts. They're the ones that keep everything together and keep it moving forward. Yeah. So how do we empower our kids, if they're not the valedictorian, if they're not the smartest or the strongest or the prettiest? What do you say to parents in that situation?
I think that one of the things that, I teach my kids, and whether that's right or wrong, is connection. So I didn't go to an Ivy League school. I went to a great football school. I went to University of Alabama. So going there, it was like, making those connections. So was I top of my class? No. But it was like, who do I know? Who can I have that connection with? And luckily, I had a professor that knew somebody at Carnegie Mellon. And she was like, let me give them a call for you to have an internship. Because I had this boyfriend in Pittsburgh that I wanted to be around, who's now my husband. But, and she was like, let me make a call. So I feel like making those connections with people and treating people like being able to say, because sometimes those C students, hey, I'll make a call for you. Let me make that call and say,
Right.
hey, like, so she made a call and said, I've got this student down here. She's interested in coming to Pittsburgh. Would you be willing to take an intern at CMU? And she was like, yeah, if you know her and you're recommending her, absolutely.
That's awesome.
So, and that's how I got my internship at Carnegie Mellon. I didn't have to interview. And there was 36 applicants for my internship, and I got it. And I think it was because of the connection. I mean, granted, I wasn't flunking my classes, but also I had that connection. And same with Children's Hospital. My undergraduate degree is in something called child life.
Okay.
When I went to college, I knew I wanted to do something in the medical field, but I didn't want to be a doctor because I had just seen my oldest brother graduate from Johns Hopkins Medical School. And he was in medical school at the time. And I was like, I do not want to do that. And I didn't want to be a nurse. So as a child life specialist, your job is to solely work on the mental health of kids in the hospital. You explain medical procedures to them and death and dying. And so I worked, my internship worked in the emergency room. So when a kid would come into the hospital, I sat at their head and explained to them what was happening. We're going to go to CT.
Wow.
This is what it is. I'm going to distract you. You're getting the stitches. How do I distract this kid? So in child life specialist, and my mother to this day, God love her, will still call me and say, I'm getting this medical procedure. What is it? I'm like, I don't know, Mom. I worked in pediatrics. I don't know. After about 18, I don't know some of those medical procedures. So, but it was such like an interesting like career, and it's so people don't really know that field. We have board exams, we have certifications. Like I had to take all the science and medical stuff, and I had to take all the developmental stuff. And I minored in grief counseling. So it was like a blessing in disguise to get up here. And that's how I got my job at Children's Hospital of Pittsburgh, was that connection.
Sure.
So I think connecting for, those C students is probably one of the most important thing. Like you may not be the top in your class in statistics or math, but you have a personality. And isn't that what, the job market is? Do you have a personality to sell ice to,
How do you fit into the culture of a company, right?
Right.
When you think about, engineering, for example, okay, and Jerry will tell you this.
Yeah.
Everybody is smart. You walk into a company and everybody is like really, really smart, right? So how do you separate yourself from that? How do you stand out?
Yeah.
It's that communication piece, the personality, and being able to make those connections and build relationships.
Yeah.
And they don't teach that.
Yeah.
Nobody teaches you that. And I don't think you're born with a personality. That's just from my experience. In raising kids and watching them, I see how personality develops over time.
And how it can change. Something traumatic can change. Something traumatic can happen to somebody and it completely change their personality. I actually got a text yesterday from a former client. And she's like, do you remember what today was? And I haven't been her therapist in 4 or 5 years. And I said, I know exactly what today is. And it was, when you work in a high school, they came directly into my office and sat down and they were like, so what do you have to report? What is your job? And I said, what do you have to tell me? Because I was like, that's a loaded,
it's a loaded
statement.
question. Oh, yes.
And so this particular client, they were, had been holding in sex abuse for several years and hadn't, reported it and hadn't, told anybody, and ended up telling me I was with them the entire time during the trial, and kind of came to, the conclusion. We were preparing for trial. We were getting ready to go to trial. And I get a call from the detective, and it's one of those things that, because there was certain a statute of limitations, and we were almost to the cusp of it. Okay. And so we were going to court. We kind of sped it along, and I get a call from the detective that says, I need you to let this person know that the perpetrator committed suicide the night before trial. And I said, okay, I will do that. So set the phone down, called the client, and out of class. It's like, sorry, getting you out of math. And I still remember to this day telling them and then being like, well, what now? We've prepared the last year for this. What do we do now? And I was like, we start to heal.
Wow.
You didn't get the justice that you wanted, but we start to heal. And
that is so heavy.
Yeah.
Right. Not only for the student, but for you.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, that's incredibly heavy to carry.
Yeah. And that's the thing, you know, Steve and I work in very stressful jobs.
Mm-hmm.
You know, his time as DA, you know, I'm very thankful to the Tomcos. He has an amazing job with very supportive bosses that are phenomenal. They treat us more like a family and less like an employee.
Tomcos are amazing people. Obviously, being in engineering and air construction, I know them, and they've supported the podcast. They're very, very supportive. And you know, that when I heard that Steve went there, okay, I was because I supported him through political campaigns and all those things, but when I heard he got that job, the first thing I thought was, that's perfect.
Perfect
for him and for them.
Yeah.
Because not only is that a great opportunity for Steve and your family, that company needed him they needed that role. Yeah. And they needed him in that role.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because Steve had worked for, he was DA and then he had worked for several law firms. And the thing about my husband, who I adore, he is a perfectionist when it comes to his job. When it came time for him to run for re-election of DA, he came to me and he said, what should I do? Because, he was record number drug arrest, record number, all these different things.
Get it right.
And at that point when he ran, we had been married 1 year. We'd had like 2 kids. And it was like in 4 years, we had dinner together 5 times. 5 times in 4 years because he just was always working. And it was one of those things I looked at him and I said, do you want my real answer or do you want my supportive wife answer? And he said, I want your real answer. I said, don't do it. And he didn't run. Yeah. And I respect him so much for that because he stepped away from something that he was really good at.
And listen, Washington County at that time had a serious drug problem.
Yeah.
It was really bad. It was to the point of just, wow, you can't understate what the issue was at that point. And he really stepped in and made that a point of emphasis, and he made a difference.
The crazy thing is, during that time when he was DA, I had been by Governor Rendell, which worked through a local agency here, assigned to close down Mayview.
Really?
So, because the budget for mental health hospitals was too big, and we were having this discussion, I said, we have all these mental health people that are coming out, and they automatically get arrested, and there's no treatment for them.
Sure.
There's all those things, and not the main reason, but one of the reasons he created mental health court, because he was like, he probably heard me chirping in his ear a little bit too much. Maybe the nagging wife got him to kind of push that through, but he was like, you're right. He's like, they don't understand because these are severely mentally ill patients or that need help. They lived in Mayview for 20 years and then they get out and
like all they knew.
Right. They get out and we've got to figure it out. Right. So he was like, we need actual treatment for these people. So, and I think that's one of the reasons, that he was that, because there's been 1 or 2 times we've been on separate sides of the courtroom. I'll never forget this. I was in one trial and he sent one of his ADAs and I was like, he was a jerk to me on the stand. And he was like, great, dinner's going to be fine tonight.
Yeah, there you go.
So I was like, he was questioning all these things and I did not appreciate. And he's like, Jen, that's his job. I said, I understand that. And it was because unfortunately, Steve and I have been on the same child abuse cases before, him on one side, me on the other. And it's like, here's the facts of the impact of the kids. Here's the perpetrator. We've kind of, it just happened that way.
Yeah.
So, and it's just something we're like, well, we're not talking tonight. So, and it does put you in a little bit of an awkward position because
Sure it
obviously with his confidentiality of his job and my confidentiality of my job, we can't talk about it.
I was going to say, how do you talk about work at that point?
We can't talk about it. So it's kind of like, yep, okay. It's like one of those things. But
Sure.
no, he's I'm very thankful for the Tomcos and everything that they've done for our family. And, you know, Steve is a 80 hour to 90 hour work week kind of guy. So, but he went from the rat race of a law firm of no matter what you do is never enough.
Right.
It doesn't matter if you bill, you know,
Billable hours.
That's all it is in a law firm. To a company, it really did take us a while when he got the job at Tomco to adjust, because it was like, go home, it's 4:00, go be with your family. And he was like, what? Like, what are you asking me to do? So, but he didn't stop there. He still has like 9 jobs, municipalities and all that stuff. But no, it is kind of interesting to see the difference in him since he has started there, because I feel like they address him, you know, so much more like a human and less like a number used to the firms. So, and I think that's helped his mental health a lot too, because I saw my husband getting beat down constantly by these firms, constantly. I'm out here doing the work. I'm out here doing this. And then it's like, you know, you're not enticed to continue to do it a little bit. So, so I'm very thankful for them.
I'll tell you this. The conversation that he and I had here was the most relaxed and open that I've ever seen him. Yeah. You know, you can tell the difference. And that is so important. And it ties into everything that we're talking about, right? Because, you know, I've been that guy. I've been that guy that worked 60, 70, 80 hours a week. And I think, you know, just not who's looking out for that person. Right. Because I'm going full speed. In the moment, you don't feel it. Yeah. You know, you might get a little bit tired, you know, but you're not paying attention to what's happening in here. Yeah. Right. And if you don't have somebody close to you that is looking out for you, you know, and see, and I've always been blessed in that, because Terry Lynn would always like, hey, what are you doing? You know, or I would say or do something, you know, I may be a little cranky because I'm tired. And she would always pull me back and not, oh, hey, sweetheart, you need to, no, it's like, what do you think you're doing right now? You know, like, so, and sometimes you have to do that. Tough love is got to be a thing too.
Yeah. And I think one of the conversations I even say to a lot of my clients is, like, if Steve's in one of those ruts or I'm in one of those ruts, you don't say, what do you want from me right now? Because want gives it optional. It makes it optional. Right. So if he's stressed out, I go, what do you need from me right now?
There you go. The difference between want and
it's
need.
It's a completely different conversation with clients. So if they come in and say, you know, I'm having this issue with my spouse and I want him to be more attentive and I want him to do this and I want him to do this. And I'm like, want is giving them the option.
Sure.
So if you say, I really need you to spend some time with me, I really need this, it changes the whole conversation.
Right. And it's hard for us to express need.
Correct.
It's easy to say, I want something. But you saying I need something opens up that little bit of vulnerability, and that scares us. Yeah. Right.
And especially someone that's dealing with anxiety. If you're dealing with anxiety, the last thing you want is a confrontation. So I'm going to be a people pleaser, and I'm going to do everything that somebody else wants because I do not want, you know, to rock the boat.
Right.
So, you know, teaching my clients to set those boundaries is difficult. And, you know, I had somebody say this past week, they were like, you know, I said it and said I didn't want to do this. And it was like, I feel really good about it. I'm like, how's it feel not to like please everybody else? And they were like, I feel a little guilty. I'm like, stop it. Nope. We're not going down that path. Nope. We're not going to be guilty for, you know, making yourself happy. Right. So, and that's one of the things I try to teach my clients that I'm like, if you can't set that boundary, then it's very difficult to be happy. Because if I'm constantly trying to please you, I'm not going to be happy ever. Okay. Excellent.
So we talked about about Steve, and not everybody that's watching this episode will know who Steve is. So obviously, you know, your husband, Steve, he's been on the show, and your kids. So I want to talk a little bit about how you and Steve met, because it's a great story. You were born in Illinois, grew up in Kentucky.
Yeah.
Steve's a Valley dude. He's from right down the road in
Yeah.
Monongahela. So tell us a little bit about how that all transpired.
Yeah. So if you believe in fate, I kind of feel like that's our story in a nutshell. Steve and I had several opportunities to meet before we actually did meet. We were at the same conference and didn't cross paths. Like, I was a freshman in high school, he was a senior. And then fast forward to my senior year of high school, he would have been a junior in college. I was with the high school band and he was with an ex-girlfriend. And we were at the same Broadway play the same night, because back then you kept all your ticket stubs because it wasn't on your phone.
Right.
So, and we may have passed each other in intermission. I don't know, but we did. We didn't meet that night. And then fast forward to my sophomore year of college, my parents were like, we're going to go to Paris and Amsterdam. If you want to tag along, you can go. And I was like, yeah, I'm not really doing anything. I'll go to Paris with my parents. That'd be great. So I tagged along, and I was in we were supposed to have the tour on Saturday. Our cab driver had just moved to Paris and we were supposed to meet at the Louvre. Couldn't find the Louvre.
Which, okay, excuse me for 1 second. That's hysterical.
So
that you're a cab driver in Paris and can't find the Louvre. But that's okay.
He couldn't find the Louvre. This was, 2001. It was before GPS.
No GPS.
So
sure.
he was like, I can't find the Louvre. So we missed our tour. So, so we went back to the hotel, and my mom was like, I don't know if we're going to do this tour. It's the only day they have it is Tuesday. Like, it's the day before we fly home. Like, I don't know. And I said, my grandfather was in World War II. I was like, let's go. We need to see the beaches in Normandy. It's not like it's, we're going to go up the street, and see it.
Yeah, sure.
So I said, let's go. And there was 25 buses in this whole bus station. And I'm sitting next to my father as my mom is getting like our tickets for the tour. And I see him walk through, and my first thought was like, he's cute. Second is, I'm not picking up anyone with my dad. Not happening. Not happening.
Dad's not the right wingman for that.
Not the right wingman for that. So we go out, and my husband is 6'4", and we get in lines. And this is very unlike my mother. We were the last ones in line. We're usually like 2 hours early kind of people in my family. And I see him, and he is so obvious of like, because we looked at each other in the bus station. He would look back, and then he would go back. And I was like, you're so obvious. So we get on
I don't think of him as being subtle.
Yeah, he's not very subtle. We get on the bus, and the driver's like, there's one seat in the back. Go sit. And his parents sat in front of us the day we met, and my parents sat behind us the day we met. So we got that over with the first day. But no, we met on a tour bus in Paris, France. So, and we toured the beaches in Normandy together. So our first day,
That's very cool.
I was starting my sophomore year at Alabama, and he had not been accepted into law school yet at that point. Okay. So he was like, I think I'm going to go to law school. I don't know, maybe. That kind of thing. So we did long distance for 3 years. We like dated other people, and I was like, this is not it. So I was like, I would go on dates, he would, and we were just like, it's just, this is kind of our person. So we did long distance for 3 years. And I moved up here for my internship. So, and that's it. So, but it's so funny if somebody says like, how did you meet? It's like, we met in Paris. They're like, really? And I'm like, yeah, that's how we met. So I was like, yeah.
Well, Paris is by default romantic and all those things.
Yeah.
But I think the fact that you guys were, it's serendipity, right? You guys were all these places at the same time. You still have the ticket stubs from Broadway. But 25 buses, one seat left on one bus.
And it's next to him.
It's next to him.
Yeah, he always says I started bugging him from day one to talk. So that's his saying. So so I was like, you got to talk to me. We're the only young people on this and not a couple. So we got to do this.
Talk, yeah.
And we went to Paris several years ago and got a picture of us in front of that bus station. So we were like, well, this is where we met. So
that's very cool.
It's kind of neat. So, and we even debated giving Sophie the middle name Paris, but we didn't. We ended up with Paige. But yeah, so it is kind of that special place for us. But yeah, that's kind of how we met. So
Good stuff.
And he
good
moved
stuff.
me to the Mon Valley.
See, and you had no idea the wonderful stuff
I
that
had
was
no
waiting for you.
idea.
This
I
is
was like, you know.
And, you know, Paris is nothing compared to Monongahela.
No.
I mean, let's be honest.
I know.
You know.
We got some amazing food in Monongahela though, so I will say. But no, it's kind of like it took work, and it's one of those things that, you know, we're very grateful for having that moment. So
good for you.
But
that is
yeah.
awesome. Well, listen, thank you so much for joining
Thank
us.
you.
And this was a great conversation. I appreciate it.
Mm-hmm.
And good luck to you. And we'll do it again. And we got to get Will and Sophie on the show.
Absolutely.
We're doing the kid thing.
Yeah.
We're still kind of, Nick, we haven't really decided on a title for that, have we? We have we? Well, he'll tell me about it. Well, yeah, when he's ready. He's
they
the
would
boss.
love to come. So
yeah, and I think I love that. And you know, we don't do enough for kids. And again, getting them and giving them a platform to talk, and that's great. So I think it'll be great. And they're both doing something really cool. Sophie with the cooking and all that.
Yeah.
And so we'll make that happen.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Appreciate it. Enjoy the rest of your day.
All right,
Thank you.
thanks.